I once had a neighbor named Bill. He lived across the street from me, and we primarily got to know each other because we were often working in our respective yards at the same time on weekends. So we would turn off our lawnmowers, meet in the middle of the street, and have a visit. One day, Bill told me he was turning 50 years old, and it was freaking him out. He said he didn't feel like a middle-aged man, but the milestone forced him to take stock. He admitted he'd been lying awake at night, replaying the tape of his life, his work, his family, all the life choices he had made along the way, good and bad. And he wondered if he had spent his time wisely or he had wasted too much of it on things that just didn't matter. Bill said that he was becoming aware for the very first time of the ticking clock of his own mortality. He was thinking about the legacy he would leave. He wondered if he should be doing something completely different with the rest of his life, something important enough to prove to himself at least that his life mattered. He was searching for purpose, a reason why he was even here. So he asked my advice. And all I could really manage was, well, whatever you do, don't go out and buy a fancy sports car. That is not the answer, because it felt like what Bill was going through was what we often call a midlife crisis, although I've never liked that phrase, as if reflecting on the meaning of your life is ever a crisis. It's not. Unless you buy a sports car, maybe. That conversation with Bill reminded me of two things. First, we can have really significant conversations anywhere, even in the middle of a suburban street. Second, that what Bill was feeling is really common to all of us. We all come to moments when we sense something in ourselves may be missing or it needs to change. It can happen when we review our past. And we can ask, what have I been doing all this time? And sometimes we can really judge ourselves way too harshly. So it's important, if we ever find ourselves ruminating over regrets, that we should give ourselves plenty of grace, that we have compassion for that person we were and still are, and the person that we are becoming. And we should all remember this. Worrying about the past is really, well, it's just wasted energy. And if you have ever caused damage to anything or to anyone, let's face it, we all have, even unintentionally because we're human, you can either try to repair what's broken, if that's even possible, and if you can't fix it, you can try to learn from it. But the past has no business haunting our present or limiting our future in any way. And then, like Bill, we can also spend time looking forward. And that might bring its own set of anxieties. We might feel a sense of urgency that time's slipping away, and what will we do with the time we have left? No one else can answer that for us, but I would suggest paying careful attention to why that question ever comes up in the first place. The truth is, we all have a reason why we live the way we do. And there are some moments that bring that reason into sharper focus. It could be a birthday, a death in the family, a job change, a health scare, a child's wedding. Those events can be tipping points. And in those moments, we can ask, okay, what now? But perhaps the deeper question is, why now? Because once we discover why, the what tends to follow. Our why is really just another way of saying our reason for being. It's not about our occupation or our income or our hobbies or our skills. You know, you might be an electrician or a banker or a teacher or an artist, or you might repair bicycles. Those things may even be your passion, but on their own, they do not define your core reason for living. Our why is bigger than that. It's about the values we hold. Do we seek justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God? Do we treat others as we wish to be treated? Those are our benchmarks of why, moral guideposts, ways of being where our spiritual compass is so interwoven with the rest of our lives, it's sort of like a script that informs our whole self. That's what my neighbor Bill was wrestling with. He wasn't really in crisis. He was waking up to his reason for being. The Gospel of John tells us a story about two men, both of whom were disciples of John the Baptist, who saw Jesus walk by, and John pointed to Jesus and said, "There goes the Lamb of God." So they followed after him, and Jesus noticed and asked, "What are you seeking?" They replied, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" And Jesus answered, "Come and see." So they spent the afternoon with him, and one of them, Andrew, quickly fetched his brother Simon. "We found the Messiah," he told Simon. And when Simon shows up, Jesus took one look at him and declared, "You are Simon, son of John, but now you'll be called Cephas," Peter, the rock. What are we supposed to make of this? Now, on the surface, it's John's version of how the first disciples were called by Jesus, but it's far more than that. It records a moment when a few people discovered or rediscovered the why of their lives. It was a tipping point. They understood that nothing would ever be the same, including, for Peter, his very name. In Jesus, they found someone who awakened what they already knew deep inside, that they belonged to the loving God of the universe. Through the teaching and example of Jesus, they discovered their reason for being, their why. And it shaped the rest of their lives, how they understood their own worth and how they regarded others as equally worthy and beloved by God. Of course, it wasn't necessarily easy. Truly loving your neighbor as yourself and insisting that God's Spirit infuses all people, that's not always neat and tidy. It can even get you into trouble. It is, countercultural to treat everyone as valuable and welcomed, not just the people we like, but the people we have a hard time liking, the people we favor and the people we fear. On top of that, there are always those who insist belonging to God, it requires strict obedience to rules, or that some people are just naturally excluded, or that there are prerequisites. For them, our why will not match their spiritual worldview, but that's okay. What matters is knowing who we are. And that's different, by the way, from feeling like you finally have it all figured out. Life figured out. I dare say most of us here don't feel that way. If you do have it figured out, let's talk, because I have questions. Seriously, I think we all have questions. We still have doubts and anxieties, but knowing why we're here, why we are who we are, warts and all, is not about knowing everything there is to know. It's about trusting that at our core, our reason for being is to always be discovering the beating heart of God's love that's within us, the incredibly high value God places on each and every one of us, the total acceptance God has for us, the immense grace God gives to us. And to see all of that in each other and in all of our neighbors, and to share that freely by how we speak and act and serve. And by the way, that's how this weekend and tomorrow we can remember and we can give thanks for Martin Luther King Jr. and honor his memory. Because what we're talking about today, that was a key piece of his theology, of his teaching and his preaching. And it's what he gave his life for, to demonstrate that God is within all people. Because if God is within everyone, then all people are inherently worthy and sacred and deserving of our efforts to ensure and safeguard their safety, their dignity, justice for them, and their well-being. That's why John's story also matters. It's ultimately about discovering that very truth about everyone. Notice how this story begins with curiosity. So important. The disciples follow Jesus simply because they're intrigued. They don't even know what it is they're looking for. They only know there is something about this man that feels like home. And when they ask where he's staying, Jesus doesn't give them an address. He invites them into an experience. Come and see. And that's how it often works with us. We don't discover our why all at once. We step into it gradually. We spend time in the presence of the holy through worship right here, through service, through conversations with one another, and slowly we come to see. Andrew could not keep it to himself. He had to go tell his brother, because when we discover our why, it spills over. It just becomes contagious. We want others to experience that same clarity, that same purpose. And notice what Jesus does with Simon. He gives him a new name, Peter the Rock, because in that moment, Simon's life takes on a completely new trajectory. He may not understand quite yet all that means, but something in him has shifted. His identity is now tied to a calling that is larger than himself. And that's the pattern we're invited to. Curiosity draws us in, experience deepens our understanding, sharing it with others spreads the joy, and gradually we live more fully into our why. To keep being curious. Because Jesus never stops inviting us to come. Come and see. And today and next Sunday as a church, we're expressing our collective why in a very important way. Today we're holding our annual open finance meeting right after worship to discuss and vote on our operating budget for this year and our outreach budget. Now, budgets can sound kind of dry, and we trust our members on the finance board and our treasurer and our outreach board and our executive council to carefully determine how our finances will work. But I also think we should look at our budget through the lens of faith. In other words, what does this budget say about what we believe? Not in some lofty theological sense, but in the sense that we can usually tell what anyone values by how they spend their money. Our budget, especially our outreach, tells the story of how we understand our mission and purpose and how we're living out God's loving intention. It says how we are welcoming others, how we are serving others, how we are following through with our values and our commitments. And next week, we'll hold our annual congregational meeting where, among other things, we will elect members among us to leadership positions. These folks are not simply filling blank slots on a page. We're counting on them to offer their insight and their wisdom and make decisions and have a vision. Not to keep our church the way it is, but to always seek out how we can be and do better. To follow the invitation of Jesus to come and see how we can grow. Come and see how we can serve. Come and see how we can nurture and be the people God needs us to be. So the folks whom we invite to lead us this year, we're depending on to creatively think about and courageously act upon our collective why. To root ourselves in God's love, to recognize that value, that holiness, and that love in each other and in all people, and to share that freely, to serve others with action, to seek and to know more fully every day why we are here and what we're called to do with this wonderful life that we get to spend together. How great is that? Amen.